They gathered in the boardroom expecting to step into an owner's shoes. Instead, advisors slid two documents across the table, and suddenly the shares they'd inherited could only be sold back to the people they barely knew. That's not a rare drafting error. It's what happens when a will says one thing about company shares and the shareholders agreement says completely something else about what can happen to them after death. The family may believe they're inheriting a business. In practice, they may only be inheriting a right to go through a sale process they never expected, on terms they did not choose, at value they didn't control. This is what catches people out, not missing paperwork, but conflicting paperwork. If you own shares in a private company and your will leaves those shares to a spouse, children, or a trust, will they actually end up with control? Will they get full value, or will the company documents send them somewhere quite different? The will is often dealt with as a personal matter: family, inheritance tax, executors, who gets what. Separately, the company paperwork gets dealt with when the business starts, when a new shareholder comes in, when somebody invests, or when a director leaves. Different moments, different priorities, sometimes even different advisors, because both documents were signed properly. Everyone relaxes. The owner feels organized, the family feels protected, the business carries on until someone dies. Think about it this way: David owned shares in a trading company with two other shareholders years ago when the business was smaller. They signed a shareholder agreement, included transfer restrictions, rights for the other shareholders to buy shares if one of them died, and a valuation that sounded sensible at the time. Later, David updated his will. In it, he left his shares to his wife, Karen, and ultimately for their two children. In his mind, that meant the family would inherit his part of the business, not just money, his part of what he had built. Nobody was being careless. He had a will. The company had proper documents. On paper, everything looked organized, but those documents were never read together. So when David dies, Karen thinks she now stands in his place, at least until the estate is sorted out. She expects the shares to pass because the will says they should. The other shareholders are looking at a different document. They're looking at the shareholders agreement and saying the family cannot simply keep these shares. They may have first refusal. They may be able to require sale, and the price may be set under the formula in that agreement, not by whatever the family had in mind. Both sides think they're following the rules. That is why these situations become bitter so quickly. A will can deal with the destination you intended. The company documents may still control the route, the restrictions, the rights of the other shareholders, and sometimes even the price. That's where preemption rights and transfer restrictions matter. Those are the rules that may say the shares cannot simply pass to whoever the will names and stay there. Existing shareholders may have a prior right to buy them. The company may have a buyback route. The documents may limit who can hold shares, and there may be a formula for value that feels different from what the family thought the shares were actually worth. The family might inherit paper ownership for a moment, but not control, or they may inherit an entitlement to value, but only through a forced process. Or they may spend months arguing over what the documents mean while the business is trying to keep trading. That distinction between ownership, control, and value matters more than most people expect. When people say, I'm leaving the business to my family, they usually mean one of three things. They may mean, I want my family to have control, or they might mean, I want my family to receive the full economic value, or they might mean both. It's possible for the paperwork to deliver only one of those, or sometimes none. So take kind of three versions of the same situation. One, the will leaves the shares to Karen, and the shareholders agreement allows that transfer with clear rights attaching to the shares. She may not want to run the company, but she has inherited a real asset with real leverage. Control may pass, or at least proper value is preserved. That's kind of like a coordinated outcome. Two, the will leaves the shares to Karen, but the agreement gives the other shareholders a right to buy them at a fair market valuation. She may never have any operation control, but she receives proper value in due course. That may still be acceptable if that is what David intended. Or three, the will again leaves the shares to Karen, but the agreement restricts the transfer, forces a sale route, and sets value under a formula that produces a lower figure than expected. Perhaps because it was written years ago for a much smaller business or discounts the shares. Now she does not get control, and she may not feel that she received the full value either. So same will, but very different result. Most then start to argue about which document wins in this instance. The more kind of practical approach is what each document is trying to do and whether, when death triggers both documents, they point to the same family outcome. There's also the fact that the family's grieving. They may also be relying on the company for income, dividends, or long term security. They may have heard the business owner say for years, "You'll be looked after, my shares will go to you." So they turn up believing that that understanding is settled. The co-shareholders are under pressure too. They may be trying to protect decision-making, reassure staff, calm suppliers, and stop the company becoming unstable at exactly the wrong moment. From their point of view, they're not grabbing something that belongs to family. They're following the bargain everyone signed up to when the company was structured. One side says David wanted us to have this. The other says David agreed. This could never happen in that way. That's when the trust breaks down, not only between families and co-owners, but sometimes between the family and the deceased person's advisors. Did he know what he had signed? Was this explained to him? Why did the will say one thing if the company rules said something else? There's a tax angle here as well, and it's worth going through with some brief numbers. I've seen that this is kind of where people can be caught out. So suppose David's total estate is about £2 million, including his shares in the business. If the shares qualify for 100% business relief, their value may be relieved from inheritance tax, or no inheritance tax due on those shares. So if £1 million of that estate is the trading company's shares and the other £1 million the rest of his estate, inheritance tax on the estate, which is taxed at 40% above the tax-free allowances, could increase by £400,000 if the shares do not qualify for business property relief, or the relief is lost because the structure or ownership route is wrong. So that does not solve the control problem. Karen could still face transfer restrictions or a forced sale under the company documents, but it shows that the family may be dealing with a control issue and a tax issue at the same time, and £400,000 is not a small number. So really sense check your own position. Ask, what happens to these shares if I die this year in practical terms? Do the shares pass to the person named in the will and stay there? Do the other shareholders have right to buy them? Can the family hold them without becoming involved in management? Is the value fixed by a formula, negotiation, or some other calculation or route? And if the family did inherit the shares, what would they actually control? Voting rights, income, seat at the table, or just a process that leads to the disposal of the shares? Many owners have not looked at control value and the transfer route together for years. The documents may have been drafted at different times, business may have changed, new shareholder may have joined, and someone may have married, divorced, retired, or become ill. Documents drift, and that drift is dangerous because nothing appears broken while everyone is alive. The contradiction only becomes visible when the will starts operating at the same time as the company restrictions. That's why updating a will on its own may not solve the real issue, and equally, tidying the company documents without looking at the will may store up a family problem later. So you need to really look at all as one arrangement. If your family had to deal with that tomorrow, the question would not be whether you had a will, it'd be whether your will and your company documents give the same answer on control, value, and what happens next.